Welcome back, guys. I'm Dr. Chris Erskine, and last time we met, we talked about the beginnings of the United States getting into World War I. We didn't talk about the United States in World War I, but we talked about the Lusitania, and we talked about Wilson winning re-election in 1916. Now, today we're going to talk about World War I, and we're going to look at some pictures that you may have seen before. But what I want you to do is look at this first slide, and this is a map of Europe. And I showed you this map last time, but I didn't show you the same map. But what we saw was this line of fortifications, of trenches, running all the way from north on the coast of Belgium, all the way down almost to Switzerland. And there was trenches or some kind of fortifications all along that line. And if you go to Europe today, if you go to France, I would encourage you to visit some of these places because you can still visit these trenches today. You can still visit some of these forts. Domont is one of them that you can visit in France today, and also some trenches in Germany, and some old cemeteries as well, including a Chinese cemetery that you would find in France. Look at the next slide, and we're going to see several pictures here. And this is what the trench looked like. You can see there's a soldier up there with his gun looking to see, what does he see? Well, we don't know what he's looking for. But how do you think it would be like to live in that trench? What happens when it really starts raining hard? Well, look at the next slide. See how many soldiers that you can spot. I see several soldiers in there. It's hard to see them, and that was the whole idea, that they could blend in. But that was what life was like in the trench. Look at the next slide. And these men are getting out of the trench, and it doesn't look like they're getting ready to go fight because their guns are not, ready to go. But this is what it would be like to climb out of a trench and go chasing across to the other trench to fight the enemy. Now here we do see some soldiers that are running toward a trench, and we can see the soldiers laying on the ground are shooting. There's people running toward them, or a person running toward them. It's kind of scary. Could you do it? Could you lay there in that trench? Could you shoot at somebody? Could you get up out of your trench and run after and shoot somebody? Look at the next slide. Now here's one where they're under attack and they're hiding against that trench. That trench, sometimes those trenches would collapse and the men inside would be covered up. They would face days and days and days of bombardments sometimes. The next slide, you can see this is a reconstructed trench, from today. And this would be a dream trench because you've got something on the ground to keep your feet out of the mud. You've got stones there. It's very narrow. But there weren't that many trenches that look like that. Look at the next slide. You can see usually men could not get their feet out of the water long enough, and so they had what was called trench foot. And this guy has had some of his toes amputated. And the next picture we have are soldiers crossing from their trench to the enemy trench, and we can see the man just left of center in the front. This picture is called the moment of death. He's being shot. This is a real battle. The next picture, we can see the same men kind of running off to battle, getting ready to go fight. And on the next slide, we can see a soldier laying down in what looks like kind of a trench or a ditch, and has his gun ready. But just to his left, which is kind of closer to you in the picture, is someone's leg and their helmet. So the body has been there for some time, and that soldier has to ignore it. Soldiers say that there were body parts on every square foot of the battlefield. Everywhere that you looked, there were body parts. And we can see on this next picture kind of the detritus of war. And in the next picture, we see bodies. And on this next picture, we can see a soldier who's been killed, and he's stuck in the barbed wire, and he was probably shot as he was trying to cross the barbed wire. The barbed wire just meant to slow you down, and while you're trying to get across this barbed wire, the enemy will shoot you. So it really was very effective. And on the next slide, we can see a soldier sitting down next to part of a dead body, another soldier. And so these soldiers became so accustomed to the death of war that it became nothing to sit down and have your picture taken with part of someone's body. And on the next picture, we can see the same thing, another part of the body there in the front left. And there's body parts and guns and things from war all along the line there. But people became just very used to seeing this. And on the next slide, we can see a hand. And what else can you see in that picture? Can you see anything else in that picture? Look at that picture. Anything else there? Maybe it's only the hand. Now the next picture, we see a color photograph of, and this is taken today, or in recent times, within the last few years, and this is a picture of one of the battlefields today, and it's just pockmarked with bomb craters, and you can walk through this today. And if you go to Europe, I would encourage you to go visit some of these battlefields from World War I and World War II. So this is now before the United States is involved. So look at the next slide. It says, what is the U.S. facing? What is the United States facing? They can see these terrible, terrible battles, a couple of battles that we don't talk about, the Verdun and the Somme. In one battle, in Verdun, we have more British soldiers die on the first day of battle than the United States loses in the entire war that it fights in Vietnam from 1963 to 1971 or 2 or 3. In 10 years of war, the United States doesn't lose as many soldiers as England loses on the first day of one battle. And so Americans are asking, what in the world is happening here? And so we can see some of these propaganda posters and the stamp, the postage stamp, if you want to mail a letter. There's Uncle Sam there, 32 cents. And the United States is at war. Well, the United States does get into the war. April 1917, look at the next slide. Why join the World War I? Well, April 1917, Congress declares war on Germany. The Zimmermann telegram. This was a telegram from the Germans to the Mexicans. And the Germans said if Mexico would help invade the United States from the south, then they would give part of the United States back to Mexico. And that would keep the United States fighting in Mexico, not going to war in Germany. So the United States intercepted this. The United States intercepted someone else, another country intercepted it and gave it to the United States. But the United States at this point only has the 200,000 man military. We're not very many people. 200,000 men. The British lost 60,000 on the first day of one battle. 60,000 dead the first day of one battle. And the United States only has 200,000. We could fight for 4 days and maybe we lose everyone. So we have to fix that. So in those 200,000 that we have, not very much combat experience. The last big war we had was the American Civil War, which ended in 1865. And so there is a Selective Service Act that's passed in 1917, and that requires people to register so that the government can call them to fight in the Army. And so over the course of the next year and a year and a half, the United States drafted 2.7 million men, 300,000 more volunteered, and so we had an army of about 3 million. And about 25% of all men in the United States aged 18 to 31 went to fight or were drafted and served in the military during World War I. So if we look at the next slide, we can see the AEF. This is called the American Expeditionary Force. It's 370,000 African Americans that served. So who are we talking about? Who was in the Army? 200,000 of these African Americans went to Europe. 40,000 saw combat. And this is in a time in the United States when Americans are racist against black people. Jim Crow laws are still in place. We've not yet got to the civil rights movement, and we're going to talk about that several chapters from now. But more whites and more whites were rejected for military service because of physical defects. And blacks were not rejected nearly as much. Still, most of the military was white. Out of 3 million, 2.7 million were white. 16,500 women, about 12,000 Native Americans, perhaps 10 to 15,000 Asian Americans. And the AEF was led by someone named John J. Pershing, general. And the United States, once the AEF, the American Expeditionary Forces, got into the battle, we had two major battles. One is Chateau Thierry, and the other one is Belleau Wood. And they're in July and June of 1918. And the Germans pushed through the Allied forces that came within about 50 miles of Paris. Now, you take Paris, you've won the war. But the United States Marines stopped the Germans and fought back. And another major offensive that we were part of was the Meuse-Argonne offensive. And that was in September and through November of 1918. And that led to the end of the war by November of 1918, November 11, at 11 o'clock in the morning. And the AEF with John Pershing led the offensive. And 27,000 Americans died in that battle. One battle, just about 3 or 4 months, 27,000 Americans died and 100,000 wounded. So this was a big deal for the United States. And when that war ended in 1918, that was a major moment, not just for American history, but for world history, because from that comes the League of Nations. The Germans have to repay some reparations, and this really almost leads to World War II. And so we're going to talk more about that stuff in future lessons, and in the next lesson, we're going to talk about what World War I was like in America, not World War I with Americans in Europe, but the politics of what's happening in the United States during 1917 and 1918. So we'll see you guys next time. All right, bye-bye.